What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel into week 25 of the Overwatch League prediction series here on the channel. After the 3-0s we got last week, I pray that this week is a bit more entertaining. And the good news is we have more chances this week since there will be more games to watch. While I am on the topic of last week though, let me quickly give my thoughts on the key matches I highlighted since you guys really seemed to like that when I did it the other week. So the first key match I had was Dallas versus Houston, and I have mixed thoughts on it. I'm happy to have gotten this game 100% correct in terms of the scoreline, but it was just a tough game to watch. It was close, yeah, but there was a lot of sloppy play, and who knows what would have happened if Houston did not C9. Overall, it was an entertaining match that also frustrated me greatly on both sides. Up next, we had Spark versus Dynasty, and this one went a lot different than how I thought it could have. I didn't really account for the meta we saw over in the APAC region, so the Dynasty ended up being at a bigger disadvantage than I thought. Not a good look from the Dynasty. The Spark were insanely dominant. The third key match was Toronto versus Washington, and yet again I found myself kind of surprised. I mean, Toronto knocked it out of the park. Surefour's skill set in this meta gave Toronto a huge advantage, and the Justice looked lost. There was no coordination, and no Ana really seems to have ruined their potential with Genji comps. Next we have Valiant and Rain, and this one went even worse for the Valiant than I thought it would. I wish they would have played Shax, but that probably wouldn't made much of a difference. Atlanta's DPS as well as Hawk played insanely well. The final key match of the week was Atlanta versus Florida, and I'd like to think that I was kind of right about some things that happened because the Florida tanks definitely were better in the current meta, but Atlanta still found a way to put up a decent fight. Florida were simply better for this type of meta, and it really played up to many of their strengths. It shows with the results. That's all I've got for my key match roundup from last week though, so now let's talk week 25. With the same hero pool being in effect, we can basically skip right over that for predictions, as you'll likely see a lot of the same stuff from both respective regions as we saw last week. With that said, how about we get into the games? So yet again, we start the week with two NA games on Friday, and the first of which will be the Atlanta Reign versus the Boston Uprising. After last week, it's safe to say that Boston will be in big trouble. The situation is usually not promising as it is for them, but this meta is shaping up to be one of their worst. It feels like this team is deteriorating with every passing week since they hit their peak in late May and early June. They looked pretty boomed during the beatdowns they suffered at the hands of the Shock and Valiant, and I'm sure that losing to Super on Genji was a huge slap in the face. Meanwhile, the Reign are starting to build up some momentum. Getting their revenge against the Valiant and even stealing a map off Florida is really good to see, and they showed promise in both matches for sure. Erster and Edison, like I said before, are shaping up to be pretty deadly, and the Reign have done great with mixing up their compositions and being less predictable and everything. It seems pretty obvious to me, but this will be a 3-0 in favor of the Atlanta Reign. Not only have they shown that they are capable in the current meta, but they also have the better Genji. Atlanta could literally just look at what the Valiant did and keep diving on Myungbong if they need to. Boston lacks the communication and peel. There was nothing they could do to save them last week, and I'm sure the Reign could replicate what the Valiant did no problem. As for the other Friday game, the Mayhem get their May Melee rematch with the Shock. This game should serve as a good indicator as to where Florida currently stands in North America. For that reason, plus this being a rematch, this will be my first key match of the week. I'm curious to find out how Florida fares here. I liked what I saw against Atlanta, but this is a completely different beast they're dealing with, and the Shock haven't even shown all their cards yet, so I'm not even sure what to expect. Like, will they play their new rookie Tayo, or are they going to do something else? They might go for like Rascal on Torb or something. They could just play standard dive. I don't know what's going to happen, but that in itself makes them extremely difficult to prepare for. Who knows what that big brain coaching staff has in store? Florida could be in for the fight of their lives, but if they stay confident, they definitely have a chance. I seriously do like them in this meta. Many of their players get to play their comfort picks. There is some serious upset potential here, especially if Tayo ends up not playing all that well in his rookie debut, if he does play, that is. While I do think it's going to be a good game, I really don't think the upset will become a reality, unfortunately. It goes back to the preparation thing. The Shock have a cloud of mystery surrounding them as you never really know what they're going to do, and I suspect that could give them the advantage. So with that said, I am picking the Shock to win 3-1. While the Mayhem do match up quite well on DPS, the Shock counter them there as well as at main tank and main support. The Mayhem will have to play close to perfect to win, and I don't believe they have it in them to do so. Now for some Saturday APAC action. To start, the Chengdu Hunters will play the Seoul Dynasty. Given how these two are coming off polar opposite weeks, I would like to highlight this as key match number 2. I won't lie to you Hunters fans, you seriously might be able to get a small winning streak going here. This meta is even more ideal for them than I initially thought. They embraced the chaos last week, and New York beat themselves up into oblivion from all the confusion. If they can do that with a disciplined team like New York, then it should theoretically be possible with the Dynasty too. After all, Seoul looked looked anything but promising in this meta against Hangzhou last week. Between playing Fitz on Sombra and not looking their best on Dive, there's reason to be concerned about the Seoul Dynasty heading into this matchup. Divas continue to be this obstacle they can't seem to overcome. I have many concerns for them in that regard. But you know what? Sometimes you gotta go against your gut. If I learned anything with these predictions over the years, it's that sometimes it's better to go with the opposite of what you're thinking. So I will be picking the Seoul Dynasty to win in 5. Some might say I'm crazy for giving Seoul more chances, but I still have more trust issues with Chengdu than I do with Seoul. I'm not quite sure if I can trust the Hunters to play consistently, as it's never been something they've ever been good with for their entire existence, and I find it hard to believe that is suddenly going to change given the current system they have. Through some better comp choices and learning from New York's mistakes, the Dynasty will squeeze out the W. Next up on the schedule, we've got the London Spitfire versus the Shanghai Dragons. Although they lost, I was happy with the fight London showed against the Charge, and I'm hoping they can do the same against a Shanghai team that hasn't played since their Summer Showdown loss. With them perhaps being a little unsure of themselves, now would be the time to strike. Whether or not they can execute, though, is up for debate. It's not exactly like they beat the Charge or anything last week. There's still much to learn, and I'm expecting them to find that out the hard way against Shanghai. It goes without saying that we are entering a meta that is extremely good for the Shanghai Dragons. I mean, they've got the Lip Sombra and Fearless on Winston. This meta is very ideal for them, and that's when Shanghai are the most dangerous in my opinion, when they can play around the Winston and Sombra comps that very few teams on the planet can stop. I would be surprised if London managed to even keep this close. Dragons take it in a clean sweep. Stylistically, this just works out way better for the Dragons. They fare much better with aggression than London does. Not to mention that J-Max Winston was a little lackluster last week, and that spells trouble considering he's up against Fearless. London still haven't proved they can defeat a top tier team yet, so that only gives me more reason to go against them. Good luck to the Spitfire, because they will definitely need it. To wrap up the Day 1 APAC games, we've got another key match ahead of ourselves. NYXL versus Guangzhou Charge, I want to say part 5? I think that's what it is at least. After the embarrassment that happened to the NYXL last week, this is a game they desperately need to win. They have to get that sour taste out of their mouths, or I fear things might really start going downhill. Last week they did show they might not have the best grasp on the meta, and when you combine that with the fact that Guangzhou have won the last 3 meetings, you'd have to think the NYXL are the underdogs. New York do have a chance though, I suppose, as they did show promise in the first few maps against Chengdu, and if they look back at what worked, then they might have a chance. But the thing is, the Charge truly are at the top of their game currently. If you exclude the monthly tournaments, they haven't lost a regular season game since the end of April. That is actually pretty ridiculous. And the scary part about it all is they have shown no signs of slowing down. They have been consistently great. Their current starting lineup coexists unbelievably well no matter what the meta. They are just, how should I put it, so good at everything. Their players are consistent, they're flexible, the coaching is fantastic, and they're comfortable with aggression and reactionary playstyles as well as anything in between. And that's what separates them from New York, I feel. They look sure of themselves. They have this sense of direction that the NYXL is lacking, which leads me to believe the Charge will win 3-2. New York would have to make some serious changes, and I don't know if they'll be able to fully implement them without a problem in just 1 week. As that series with Chengdu went on, their insecurities really started to show. They're historically inconsistent with Sombra comps, and yet they keep on forcing themselves to play them. Also, I can't really trust in the coaching to realize that they should stop running SBB Nene so much. Their coaches feel so stubborn to me, so I don't know if they'd be able to do that. And I mean, the NYXL always have been a team who have a hard time reacting to something that gives them trouble or when somebody pushes them back hard. They aren't resilient enough, and they don't really have enough flexibility. The Charge win this and keep their streak going. Moving onwards to the Saturday NA games, we start with the Shock and Titans. To be honest, I can't say I'm looking forward to this one. Unless Super were to play Genji or we know for a fact that Taiyo will play, I doubt this will be extremely interesting or fun to watch. I mean, it's a big mismatch. What else is there to say? You have a top team in the league going up against one that is probably bottom 5 in most people's eyes. And it's in a meta that is not fantastic for the Vancouver Titans. They have struggled greatly with Genji comps. They do not have a dominant Genji player on that roster. We saw what happens if that's the case in the Shock Boston match. It's not going to end well. This should be an easy 3-0 for the Shock. There's not much to go into here. It's a mismatch in every way you can think of, roster-wise, coaching-wise, and composition-wise. I also think it's worth bringing up how one-dimensional the Titans tend to be in-game. The casters have gone over this a lot the last few weeks, but it feels like there's not much to them, in a way. They tend to stick to the same habits and styles. It makes them very, very predictable. You can't afford to be easy to read against the Shock. You'll get eaten alive. Sorry, Titans fans, but this is a GG go next. Moving on to the next one. The Justice go up against the Mayhem. This is yet another scenario where it looks like a mean mismatch on paper. I know I'm not the only one who felt a little disappointed with the Justice last week. Against a team that should be around their skill level, they couldn't even take a single map. And again, it goes back to what I was saying earlier. No Nanoblade seems to severely hurt Tuba's effectiveness on that Genji. They have over-relied on that as their crutch, and it shows. And that's not the only problem here. Because Roar can't really play a great Rein, they're a really one-dimensional Winston dive team. It helps that Janu Sigma doesn't even synergize all that well with Roar's Winston. There's a night and day difference between these two rosters and their levels of effectiveness. I have Florida winning 3-0. With the current circumstances, the Mayhem are in a way better position. I prefer them very much everywhere, basically. I especially like them more at main tank and DPS. Yaki is a better Genji than Tuba, and BQB has proven to be more consistent than Stitch as well. Moving on to the 7 PM EST slot, we've got the Boys in Blue showdown. Boston versus Dallas. Gamsu Note going up against their former home. Given the skill gap and the fact that Dallas have just this one game to prepare for, I believe they are favored by a decent margin. I already talked about Boston before, and my thoughts kind of remain the same heading into this game. They look completely lost when it comes to how to play this meta, and their mental is not in the best of places. And they have to go up against a Dallas team who probably feels amazing after reverse sweeping Houston. There are so many issues that present themselves with Boston's gameplay. No fight really feels winnable when watching them. Every little thing seems to be a problem right now, and that all adds up over time. I'm picking the field to win in 4. I'll give Boston a pity map because they'll probably be fed up with getting 3-0 at this point, but the field do appear to have a good idea of what works for them in this meta compared to Boston. They swap between Decay and Onigod while getting consistent Genji play from Doha. I also think that Note has found his groove recently. I liked what I saw from him on the Sigma last week, and since he has a solid diva, he's not some one-dimensional player who holds the team back. Boston can't really compete with this in my opinion. To finish up Saturday, the LA Gladiators take on the Philadelphia Fusion. While I can't confidently say this game will be amazing, I definitely am interested to see how it plays out. First off, this is Philly's first game back since that crushing defeat in the Summer Showdown. So the question is, what version of the Fusion do we see? Will they brush the loss off and move forward, or will they show signs of it getting to them? Depending on how effective they are, this game could be closer than we all anticipate it to be. Philly have a chance to show us that they have nerves of steel, or nerves made of like paper mache or something. And I mean, hey, beating Vancouver, while it doesn't tell you much, did show that the Gladiators are showing more signs of confidence that we haven't seen in quite some time, so maybe they could make Philly work for this. We've seen them fight hard against Philly in the past, so maybe they have it in them to do so again. I like this meta a lot for LA. Their ability to swap between main tanks is great, and their DPS rotation could be pretty effective if they continue to use that strategy we saw against Vancouver. It's probably worth mentioning that Philly seemed hesitant to play dive during the Summer Showdown, so maybe LA could impose their will if the Fusion continue to avoid dive. If I had to take a guess though, the Fusion will likely be fine. Carpe has shown resilience throughout his entire Overwatch career. He suffered tough losses many times, and I'm confident he will bounce back from this one as well while leading his team to a 3-1 victory. I think avoiding dive was just a game plan during that tournament, and I fully expect the Fusion to break out Winston in some situations. And I would say the Fusion are a better dive team, so that would spell trouble for the Gladiators. Besides the ridiculous Rein strats, Philly can play anything LA can, but better, and they should even do fine in a mirror considering how great the Fusion have looked when they play around Sato with those compositions. They have the stronger DPS and much better supports. This game screams Philly advantage. I suspect the Gladiators might show some fight, but it will not be enough to overpower the Fusion. Now for day 2. Kicking it off is the Chengdu Hunters versus the Hangzhou Spark. I'll cut right to the chase here. If I don't believe Chengdu can beat Seoul, then it's hard to imagine them winning against the Spark either. In fact, I would argue the Spark will do even better than Seoul in this matchup. I tend to think the Spark like a faster pace more than Seoul or New York. Given that they have Gushwei, IDK, and Architect, the Spark enjoy playing aggressive. I mean, that just seems like a given to me. I'm sure they'll be more than happy to pick up the pace. If you ask me, the Hunters are playing right into their hands. The Spark kind of like crazy, so they should feel right at home. It's easier said than done, of course, considering how weird the Hunters are, but I like the Spark's odds of overpowering their foes. I get this feeling they'll know how to deal with the ball comps even better. Like with Seoul, all they have to do is look back at the film and do the exact opposite of what the NYXL were doing. I love the Spark DPS in this matchup too, as they're way more consistent. And one other thing worth mentioning is that I for one think the Spark's Winston Zarya is very strong, so their tank should be able to do just as much as the Hunter's tank rotation. I'm going to use my opposite logic with Chengdu again and see what happens. Usually I would argue this game could end up being close just because of what happened last week, but that's what they want me to think. The Spark win in a clean sweep. Will I regret making this prediction? Probably, but screw it. No going back now. The Spark are a better overall team, and I still don't trust the Hunters like I mentioned before to be consistent. To close out the APAC games this week, the Seoul Dynasty take on the Shanghai Dragons. Second verse, same as the first. The Dragons are going to be a pain to deal with this week. It's amazing how well this hero pool works out for them. Consistently playing Monkey with Zarya, Sigma, or Diva with a Sombra is too OP for them. I remember a while back Seoul managed to take a map off Shanghai using the Winston Zarya composition, but I believe it's going to be a different story this time. The Dragons have been able to consistently practice that composition now, and you have to combine that with the potential Sombra difference, so if Seoul wish to try and match it, they are doomed. The Dynasty just don't impress me on dive. They really don't do it for me. Considering who they have on this team too, that is pretty darn sad. But hey, I don't make the rules. This is it. Seoul rarely take maps in non-double shield metas, and that trend will continue in my opinion against a team that outmatches them in the current meta. Shanghai Dragons all the way here. 3-0 victory without too many problems. Seoul would really have to work around countering Lipsy MPs to have a chance, and even that might not be enough. Seoul still likes to be too passive and indecisive at times, and that will do you no good against the Dragons. Now for the final 3 NA games of the week on Sunday. To start, the Gladiators played the Paris Eternal. I gotta say, this is shaping up to be a rough week for the Glads. Philly and Paris back-to-back in the same week? I feel bad. That's going to be a nightmare. Having to prepare for one of them on its own is tough enough, but now I've got both of them to worry about in the same week. Paris backed up my statement from last week. This hero pool is scary good for them. Ben Best on his Rhine, Spark on the Genji plus his Doomfist now apparently, and FD got on the Lucio. It's simply not fair. If you aren't of elite status, this is going to be a pain in the neck. The aggression, the discipline, the decisiveness, the pop-off potential of their superstars, the deadly force is practically insurmountable. Unless DPay comes up with the most 5-head strategy of all time, this will likely be an L. The Eternal continue their reign of terror with a 3-1 victory. I'm hoping we get to see Ben Best versus Cloudy Ryan action though. That would be a real treat. Because for one, they're both amazing EU Reinhardts, but also they were former teammates on Paris, so that'll be interesting. And who knows, if Cloudy were to play well enough, then maybe that could keep the Glads in the game. Next up is the Philly Fusion versus the Toronto Defiant. Toronto had mixed results last week. They looked good in one game and thoroughly outclassed in the other. I like that they found ways to implement Beast and the fact that they made good use of agilities and Sureforce hero pools, but this team isn't strong enough to hang in there with the elite. With Paris being around the level of Philly, it's hard to imagine that Toronto fare any better this week. I want to believe in them, I really do, because they're capable of some good things in the current meta, but there's a serious skill gap that presents itself. You're dealing with a more talented team that can beat you at your own game. Philly are no joke on Genji comps. Their DPS are just as flexible, their tanks are simply better, and Funny Astra has crews beat out in every way you can think of pretty much. The Fusion take it 3-0. All you have to do is go off their last meeting during the Summer Showdown. The comps being played are fairly similar, and Toronto hasn't even gotten noticeably better or anything. I would love to see them succeed, but I'm afraid this is a losing battle. And finally, to end week 25, the Houston Outlaws take the stage against the Washington Justice. Houston may be a weaker team than Florida, but my mindset is pretty similar for Washington here. Last week left a sour taste in my mouth that I just can't get over. There are so many holes in their play, and it's scary how one-dimensional they are. The Justice desperately needs some of their playmakers to step up, and I just don't really see it happening for more than one map. I mean, for like a whole game. Stitch needs to come up big. Him versus Dante will be a huge individual matchup to look out for. If Stitch can play a solid overall series and really push Dante back, then the Justice could put up a good fight. I'll be looking towards Janu to have a better day in the Sigma too. If he plays the way he did against Toronto, then Meko's going to dominate him. Tupa can't do this on his own, let's call it how it is. Without the nano boost, somebody else needs to step up. They simply cannot rely on one man. Overwatch is a team game, and they need to start showing that. But if you look at some of their most recent results, improvement, like at least quick improvement I should say, in that regard seems unlikely. They are playing a team that is far more flexible and fundamentally sound. Houston may have lost a heartbreaker last week, but this is the right team to play after that kind of loss. I find it hard to believe that Houston would be so crushed from that match that they suddenly play way down to their competition for an entire game. Hydration played better than I thought he would last week on the Reinhardt against Gamsu, so I have confidence he will show up alongside Meko and Dante. Through a better sense of how to play the meta and their superior teamwork, I have the Houston Outlaws winning the series 3-1. I'll give the Justice a map simply because I think Houston might get off to a slow start, but that's all I think they will be able to get. The Justice lack the versatility and firepower to keep up. I don't really see them making this all that close, unfortunately. And that, my friends, is going to conclude my predictions for Week 25. I hate to say it, but this week isn't looking much better than the last one. Maybe you have some more optimistic predictions than I do, though. Tell me who you've got winning down in the comments section to keep that discussion going, and if you guys enjoyed today's video, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. If you're interested in supporting me beyond just that, then it would mean a lot to me if you could follow me on Twitter, join the community Discord through the link in the description, and purchase a channel membership. And as always, thanks so much for watching. I really do appreciate it, and until next time, this is ATP, signing out. Peace.